Hello, I'm Sumit Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and futurenetzero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Technology, it'll drive net zero forward. And if you've been watching the news, you know it's the thing that everyone's talking about. Whether it's the Chinese AI that's been nicking stuff off ChatGPT, whether it's the creation of this Silicon Valley that Rachel from Accounts wants to do down in the south, whether it's all the investment in nuclear fusion, or of course the creation of GB Energy. Well, there's an organisation that is funded by the Scottish and the British government called the Net Zero Technology Centre based in Aberdeen. And it's been at the forefront of this sort of stuff for the last 5-6 years. And I'm delighted to say the CEO, Myrtle Dawes, joins me now. Myrtle, hello.
Hello. I hope you're well.
I am well. And I can't believe that it's sunny in Aberdeen and it's miserable down here in London.
Yes, it's a rare day. A rare day.
Now, people may not have heard of the Net Zero Technology Centre, but they probably have heard of things like Innovate UK or Energy Catapult. Can you just give our sort of viewers and listeners an idea of what this body does? Because it was set up by the government, wasn't it?
Yes. So the centre, which originally was the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, was actually set up following a report from Sir Ian Wood. And this was still around the things we have today, which was around how we actually make the North Sea more economically strong. And our mandate was around maximising economic recovery. And one of the things that we had was, look, we've got fantastic universities, great ideas. Yep. So much of our technology leaves these shores. We've got great supply chain. How can we start anchoring some of this technology? And how can we make our energy companies more receptive to the use of new technology? And that's where we started. And we're funded by industry as well, 50%. And so really, it's been about how can we get the entrepreneurs and developers and the startups with all these great ideas about how to solve problems with those who actually have the problem and are willing to pay for that. And so that's what we do. And, mainly a technical team, most of us from industry, various engineers, scientists, business people as well. And it's all about finding how to do that, because the issue for us here in the UK has never been that we don't have world-class research and ideas and entrepreneurs. It's about that we're not very good at translating those ideas into wealth, into the next unicorn, etc. So there, as you can see, you reeled off some of the tech companies, and obviously you've heard that China is very technologically advanced. But if you go to some of those tech companies, you'll see Brits there, and the question is, how can we get that wealth here?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I had a chat with someone. I'm not that posh, but I do sometimes meet people in the city, and they were saying that the big problem is that we're brilliant at the startup level. And we're actually quite big when someone's really big and they're on the city and they're having a flotation, that's fine. But that middle bit where the entrepreneur's gone, I've got an idea, oh, here's a few grand, get you going. And then the funding dries up when they're going through that trough of trying things out. Do you think there's an issue there that we don't just look at it enough? Because you hear about people who start businesses here, get a little bit of money, and then they go to America. And that's when they succeed, or they go somewhere else. Why do you think, before we go into what you're doing, why do you think there's a need for you in the first place?
So I think, look, there's always going to be a need for an organization that is coordinating a lot of these fragmented and diverse things. So, we deal with startups. Not every company
Yeah.
wants to deal with hundreds and hundreds of smaller companies. But what I would say is on the research front, we're very strong. And on
Yeah.
getting direct government funding into research and development, we're actually very good. The issue is once it's been developed to a certain stage and it's ready for the first of a kind use, it's ready to be scaled up. So rather than having £1 million grant or £100,000 grant, now we need a 5 million packet of investment. That is difficult to get. That is the space that a lot of companies sit, and Americans are with the bigger, obviously, pocket. They will fund a 5, a 10, a 15, or 20 million bet. You tend to find it less so here in the UK, and we've funded companies have actually gone to the US actually to do their startup. Surprisingly, some of them have come back because it's been too fast. But essentially, we need to be able to stay with a company through the first of a kind scale up and let it establish itself here in the UK. And that does take more than the smaller grant packets that you say get from UKRI or Net Zero Technology Centre or some of the other grant giving organizations.
Your background, and it's quite interesting. You said it started off as, obviously for the oil and gas. Wood is a famous name in North Sea oil and gas, and you're based in Aberdeen. You flipped. You called yourselves now the Net Zero Technology Centre. I assume this is the oil and gas industry, which, by the way, I mean, I think it's vital, right? Whatever people say, there's a lot of people that say just get rid of it. I think they're stupid because you can't get rid of it right now, but it will transition. It has to transition. Is this one of the things that you internally made that decision that actually a lot of those technologies will now go into sort of offshore wind farms or recovery or storage, so you can do that skills swap over that the government's been talking about? Is that why it flipped itself to be called the Net Zero Technology Centre?
It wasn't the original reason. The actual reason, and this was when the previous CEO was here, was that when we started what we do, horizon scanning. So as a technological company, we're always looking into the future. And one of the things that when we were talking to industry about what is it that you need to maximize economic recovery and allow and make sure that we last until 2050, the key thing that came out about is that we needed to transition to net zero. This was the word that was around 2017. And if you look at the first kind of roadmaps that we produced, it had things around net zero. And indeed, when I joined in 2019, we already had a solution center which was dedicated to net zero. And then we decided to do all our business that way. So for us, it was because that is the way oil and gas actually was going to continue. It wasn't ever going to continue in its current
Yeah.
format. And that opportunity for investment and to actually have to clean up the house and still support the UK economically was something that we thought was very important.
Were you in the oil and gas sector yourself?
Yes, I started as a production engineer offshore with BP on the
So
Forties field.
your own journey, before we go into what made you move into this, and how did you find that? Because a lot of people I talk to in oil and gas, and you got to go back, 25, 30 years, everyone wanted to be an oil and gas engineer, right? And it was, exciting and all of that. But also most people I've talked to, maybe it's the same with you, felt they were doing something pretty good. They were like, securing cheap energy for people. What was your feeling when you got into it, and how have you changed in your own kind of views?
You're spot on. Most of us who join oil and gas, I'd say all of us, because I don't think anyone joins with any nefarious. This was and remains a big provider of taxes into the exchequer to pay for UK PLC. Working in energy was something that was seen as something good. It heated houses. It did a lot of good and
Yeah,
continues to do so. The downside of it on CO2 was not that apparent to
yeah,
everyone. Surprisingly, as an engineer, I did know about CO2, but what I will say to you is, in general, I've always found the industry to quite responsive. The very first project I worked offshore on was actually about cleaning up the effluent of the water that
oh
we put
wow,
into the sea. And when I went on to work on projects, some of the biggest projects I worked on were to do with reducing the gas or stopping the gases which were causing the hole in the ozone layer. So from an engineering perspective, we're quite pragmatic. So we're fine. Like, if there's a problem or a rule that we need to follow, we tend to do that. And I do remember when we started first talking about Paris, Oslo, Kyoto in terms of our engineering designs and what
Yeah.
we're going to do. And of course, it's become much bigger in terms of the realization, not just of the damage, but perhaps the lack of time to resolve. But again, as an engineer, I'm into it. I'm saying, okay, well, what do we need to do? So for me, it's not really for me a blame issue. It's about what is it we can do quickly to address the issues. But I don't believe in single issue management, so I don't think we can just have net zero on their own. I do think we do need economic development. We do need to collaborate with our global partners because net zero in the UK on its own also means nothing. So we do need to export, and that's what gives us the opportunity to really tune into our technological skills and use that as part of our export portfolio.
When did you, but just staying on this little bit here, when did you decide, right, I'm not going to stay in the oil and gas industry as it was, and you moved into this mind of looking at the technologies and the net zero field? Was there some particular moment in your life where you went, enough of this?
I can't say that there was. I didn't leave oil and gas per se because I didn't like working in oil and gas. I mean, if I'd stayed in oil and gas, I mean, I used to work in at one time in HSE. I'm sure I'd be working on a net zero project now, as a lot of my
Yeah.
colleagues are. And I joined this business when it was the Oil and Gas Technology Center. But I absolutely, I'm committed to net zero. And someone asked me yesterday, Myrtle, do you want to change the world? And I said, no. But what I do want to do is help those who do want to change the world. And those with just a little bit more energy and passion than me. I'm far too pragmatic a person. So, like you, I think, we've got to be pragmatic about what we do. We need to move on the renewables and the new energies. And we need to make sure that if we're using gas, that it's as clean as possible and that we get to net zero. So, I think we need to do it all.
I mean, you've just literally just recently released some money, like £500,000 to
Mm,
help some tech startups, and
mm,
they're in a variety of different fields.
mm.
Is this the key thing? So you've got one company that is doing kind of modular generation, another one's looking at low cost wave energy converters, loads of weird, crazy things here. I mean, methane
Yeah.
pyrolysis, I couldn't even understand what that is, but even software platforms.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at what you're doing at the center, are you looking at sort of holistically at technologies? You're not going, all right, this is one technology we're going to promote. You're looking across the field at different parts of what gets us to lower emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how we split it is we're doing industrial decarbonisation.
Right.
And that's really important because that's where the CO2 and the methane is coming from. And we absolutely need to work with all the companies there to get the best technology to abate that, to prevent that, to capture it. And then what we also do is we are working with what we call the new energy. So this is the carbon capture, the hydrogen, wind, alternative fuels. All of these things are really important. The full gambit for energy, of course, extends beyond that. We're talking, as you talked about, nuclear fusion.
Yeah.
We've got lots of things. There's hydro, there's solar, there's all of the stuff around batteries and storage.
Yes.
All of this is important. And the platforms that underpin these and get into that quickly and having a digital underlay, making sure we've got autonomous systems for all of these floating wind farms that we want and robots so that, it's not dangerous for people to go offshore and do these things. And we can reduce costs. These are really important. So when we're using technology, it's not just about the exciting bit, like, can I have a look at the electrolyzer for green hydrogen? It's about pumps, it's about valves, it's about how do we maintain it, it's about all of these things and what we call system thinking. So as an engineer, if I had to put a whole project together, it would be lots and lots of things, and that's why we support lots of things. So it's quite holistic and more at the system level that we're working at.
This is a very interesting thing you raise, which is, people having a good idea, right? I don't know, is a bacteria that eats hydrocarbons. And you go, yeah, this is great in the lab. And then you go, well, actually, you've got to deploy it at sort of, 12,000 feet under the ocean. How the hell are you going to do it? All of that stuff. Is this another element of where what you're trying to do at the NZT is basically you're looking at the practical way a product can go into reality. Because you just said there are all these things that safety. I didn't even think about that. You're right. You just lay a wind turbine cable. That's bloody dangerous work. So is that another thing that kind of we sometimes skip? We get the idea is it's all just in the lab and it's quite easy.
Yeah, and you've got it spot on. See, the developers and the very clever people
Yeah,
have solutions to problems that no one has told them that they have.
yeah,
And so they would normally go looking for that problem to marry it. But actually, what we are encouraging people is to go to the people with the actual problem and then see if your solution can be adjusted.
it's
This
the
is
other way
what we call
around.
a
Yeah,
use case, yeah. So it isn't unusual for a developer to come in. Remember, they're very proud about their technology
of
or
course.
their idea, and they'll say, and this is how we think it can be used because you have to have a use case.
And you say, no, no one would do that.
I can think of a different way. And the other thing that we've done, which we're very proud of, is because we get so many small ideas,
Yeah.
this is point solutions. Sometimes someone will come with an idea here to do this, and someone will have another idea to do that. And we thought, my goodness, if they join that together, now we've got a solution. And we have a wave device and a subsea battery storage, which was two different projects that came into the center. One was doing wave device, but had nowhere to store the electricity. One was
Doing
a
storage.
battery you could have on the seabed, but no electricity going into it. But of course, if you wanted
Yeah.
to have electricity offshore locally, you need both, don't you? And so that joining together, and that's why we work so close with industry. What are industry's problems? Let's bring them a system answer rather than a part there and expect them to go and fix something else over here.
You're based in Aberdeen, which has always been, probably still is, the energy sort of centre for the UK. Is most of your technology still based around industries in the North Sea, or would you say it's kind of land-based stuff? You're looking across the board? Because I would kind of think, oh, right, you're trying to help oil and gas go into sort of renewable energies and offshore wind, or is it wider than that?
It's much wider. So, over the last few years, a lot of people have entered this space in terms of the new energies. I mean, the oil and gas companies are pretty much who they were, although, of course, there's been a lot of consolidation. But lots of people have entered this space, big and small. And the solutions we have, obviously, are global solutions. So we have companies that we've supported, people who have sold their flat and gone to live with their parents. We've supported them, and now they have a global business. They are actually exporting. So most of the solutions we have are applicable elsewhere, and that's what you'd expect. There's wind everywhere elsewhere. There's geothermal elsewhere. So all of these things, the areas, and in fact, I'd say it was the other way. For example, we don't do a lot in solar, but solar is a very large component of the energy from a global perspective. But I suppose in Aberdeen we don't have enough sun, so we don't have that many people supporting it. But actually, it's what we do here, all of it is exportable. None of it is just for the UK.
We spoke on a podcast recently with, funny you talk about that, talked to Stuart Broadley from the Energy Industries Council, and this was the thing about how great we are at creating things here, but not as good as taking that idea, scaling it, and then selling it to other nations, which is going to be part of this energy transition. And just recently, Ed Miliband said that this is unstoppable, right? So he told committees net zero is not going away. So is that another area you think that we could do better in, which is not only helping those companies, like you say, scale, but then going, right, they've got a product here, which we can use here, but let's sell it around the world.
And look, the supply chain already does that. I think from the supply chain's perspective, if they've got certainty around market, etc., they'll manufacture, they'll hire people, and they'll deploy where they need to. I think we haven't been as good at some of these things because we lose our technologies and what we call the intellectual property very early. So, part of this thing, we call it about anchoring the technology, having the IP here in the UK and ensuring that part of that wealth stays here is super important. Not all of it should stay here, though, because, we can't do everything and we don't have deep pockets. And we want to have successful companies. But where it makes sense, we should have it here. And sometimes we perhaps are not supporting enough the companies to stay here, have their head offices here, do their research here, and then just export. But look, this is a global business, so the competition for these technologies and the people is quite big.
Briefly, where do you think things get stuck? Is it basically funding gaps or is it regulation? Because people say there's a lot of red tape, and I know the government's trying to chop a lot of that away. You've got Trump now going, right, let's just do this. Whether you agree or disagree, he's breaking down barriers for a lot of businesses. Are they two major issues? The funding, which we've talked about, but also the regulatory frameworks. That it takes 15 years to build an offshore wind farm because it's got so many people.
Yeah. So look, I normally say, look, the government has five levers. It can either do something with pricing, which is things like make sure that things which have carbon in cost more. It can set standards, things like making sure that we've got pipes that can take hydrogen. It can do direct government funding for technology, infrastructure, and skills. This is somewhat what GB Energy is going to do, and that direct funding is quite important. Sorry about that. And then what we also can do is you can increase corporate accountability. So these are the things about climate-related financial disclosures, targets, and then obviously there's subsidy. What I would say is each of the governments around the world, if you do look at it, are doing different things because their economy is different. So look, the US had huge subsidies which we could never compete with. What we have is great standard setting and actually a real commitment in terms of direct funding, including the R&D. And actually we do quite a lot on disclosures. That's making sure that corporations are accountable. We do something on pricing in terms of carbon tax and things like CBAM. So we do quite a lot, but it is a mixed bag in terms of what we do. And to some extent, we can't do it all. And sometimes we look to the US and say, why can't we do that? Well, we just simply don't have the firepower. But I
Yeah.
suppose, as we've seen with the recent AI, you don't always need the firepower to be really good. So we need to find the niches that we sit in. And my view is, look, I was about to say it's a temperate climate. It can be quite cold here. We're always going to want to keep warm. It's a country with great education, great institutions. So we shouldn't fall behind. We just need to find where we fit in and be quite deliberate and consistent.
Before we go, obviously GB Energy, the board has been announced recently. It's coming to be based, I think, in Aberdeen, if I'm right. They'll be your neighbours, and you'll be waving to them. What's your thoughts on this? Because there's two conflicting thoughts. One is, yeah, it's great, and then I've heard from industry people saying, well, I don't want to be involved in that. I want to make my own decisions where I'm going to stick my wind farms. And those are the people that are making these big decisions are multinationals, and they don't need governments to sort of say they just want permits to do this stuff. And also, it's coming from us. Eight or whatever it is billion. It's a lot of money. How do you see its role and what it could do based on kind of what the government wants it to do?
Okay. So look, I think it's great to have somewhere where industry and the general ecosystem can coalesce about what we're doing about GB, British Energy. I see no reason for that to be a bad thing. They're doing some interesting things. So, for example, the support for local power. Absolutely, that's important. I think the new energy system will be not as centralized as it is at the moment. So things which are going to encourage that and put actual real funding into that is super important. I think that an organization like GB Energy, which can actually knowledgeably talk about the planning constraint problems that are happening
Yeah,
because they might have a stake in what's going on and then attempt to fix some of that, I think is great. Look, GB Energy is coming with the better part of 8 billion over, I think it's 10 years. If you look at how much is required to do net zero, we're talking the trillions. They are
yeah,
not here to invest and do the infrastructure for us. They are a lever and a catalyst for getting that done. And I think that's how we need to view them. And I think that's how they'll view themselves. And the one thing I will say, I do see a lot about, well, it would be really great if GB Energy could invest in these projects. And
Yeah.
they may well do so along with the wealth fund, a small, modest amount of the trillions that are going to be invested. But if you look at the Norway model, the Norwegian government has a share of all of the assets, the energy assets, and that's what makes them so informed about what's going on. I think this is the right step for an organization like them. As to what we actually end up with UB Energy, that really will be for the team to see what they can carve out, going forward.
Have you had any contact with them yet? And will you be working with them? How will it work?
So we have had contact. We've had several meetings with their team. As you know, they are seeking their senior team at the moment. We've met Jürgen, and I'm hoping to meet again with them relatively soon. We are obviously want to join them as technology partners because that's what we do, and we know a lot about technology and how we can put it into systems to make it work. So what we want to do is to help them have a fast start. To say, look, you don't need to pull all that together. We are here as cousins who could help you there.
You started your career, I think you said in the early 90s, right? The world's
Yeah.
very different from then. The last few years, Brexit, COVID, energy crisis, war in Ukraine, all of that. A lot of stuff that's gone on. There was a kind of growth of net zero. We're all net zero, and everyone's declaring and all that pants and greenwashing like crazy. And then there's been a bit of a reality set in. We've seen it with EVs or loads of take up, then a sort of fall, and then maybe they're starting again. Where do you see this? Because at the end of the day, you said it earlier, it will take trillions. It's a change of system, right? The biggest change we've had since electrification, probably. It's a change of infrastructure and it's a change of science. There's a lot of things. Do you think it can be done?
I think it can be done. Whether it be done or not, it's going to be done, and in what way, I don't know. And I tell you why it can be done. If we put our mind to it, we would do it because they're spending trillions on AI, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So because of the potential, so they're spending trillions in AI. So of course it can be done. And if I look at some of the grand projects that we're doing here in the world, we are planning to put people on Mars. You can't even breathe on Mars. So, we're going to build fantastic spaceships. We're going to have a great space station. We're going to propel people over to Mars, and we're going to build, habitats and for people to live in. So when I look at that, and then I think about us taking parts per billion in terms of managing the carbon in our atmosphere. Of course, we can do it. Now, the issue is who's going to pay,
Yeah.
and can we do it quickly enough before it has a catastrophic impact on our lives or on some other lives? And I think that's important. But I think in terms of the challenge itself, if we were all behind it, of course we could do it. It is not the biggest challenge that we've got on the planet if we were all going to do it. Um,
Okay.
but what I would say is none of what we achieve is achieved by managing a single issue. So net zero is part of a suite of things that we need to manage here on the planet, and and that's going to have to be the way that we look at it. Because if you look at the 3 billion people who hardly have any energy, and then ask them not to progress, that's not going to work either. So we do need to view this in a more holistic way.
Well, Myrtle, if there's ever a job for world president, I put you. I like it. Just a little bit of an advert for the Net Zero Technology Centre. If a company's listening, or who are the people that could come and get in touch and say, "Hey, Myrtle, I've got an idea." Does it matter what it is? How would they get in touch with you guys?
So they could just on our website, we've got a button to press like where they can get in contact with us. And look, we are really looking for people who've got great ideas. We run a funding calls where we ask people for ideas, and then we obviously mix it up with industry. We're currently going for requesting additional funding for the government because we're coming to the end of our first 10 years, and we feel it's really important that we continue because of the exciting things that have already been deployed over the last 10 years. But look, we want to work with everyone who's got something around, especially net zero energy. But if you've got a great idea, we'd love to hear from you because we'll know someone who might be able to help you with that as well.
Brilliant. I like it. It's like matchmaking for technology.
Yes. Yeah.
Myrtle, thank you so much for spending the time. I know you're a very busy lady, so I
Thank you.
really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What do you think? Are you involved in this field? Have you got a crazy idea that would take my pen and make it have no carbon footprint? Get in touch. Get in touch on social media. Let us know what you think. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Catch the next one and please subscribe to the Net Hero podcast.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.